Undercover boss orders coffee stops cold when waitress says her tips got stolen. The early morning sunlight quietly filtered through the dusty glass window of Sunrise Coffee House, a small branch nestled in a quiet residential neighborhood on the west side of the city. In the farthest corner, where the light touched just enough not too harsh, sat a man in silence, his elbows resting on the table, a black coffee tilting gently in his hand. Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder of Foster's Coffee House. But today, he wasn't accompanied by a corporate team. No assistant, no expensive suit. Just a faded khaki jacket, simple jeans, and an old baseball cap like any regular customer stopping by before work. He was on an unusual undercover visit, unannounced, unplanned. He simply wanted to know what was really happening when no one knew who he was. The coffee had just been poured hot, aromatic, with a thin trail of steam. Michael was about to take a sip when my tips are missing again. I left them in the locked box, and now it's empty. The voice was small, almost a breath. But to him, it rang out like a blade slicing through the flawless shell his brand had worked so hard to preserve. Michael froze. He didn't take another sip. From the corner of his eye, he looked toward the bar. Two young women were whispering behind the worn silver La Marzocco espresso machine. One wore a tag that read "Rachel Loose Curls" falling around her face, hands swiftly wiping glasses. The other ponytail, high eyes darting around, was Sasha, seemingly the shift led. Michael tilted his head slightly, just enough to hear. Rachel's eyes were red, but she still forced a smile at the table beside her. Sasha's voice was lower, firmer. "Keep your stuff close. Here, if you're not careful, things go missing. Don't ask why." That line, though, soft, hit Michael like a bucket of ice. A soothing phrase disguised as a quiet warning. No one noticed. No one reacted. No manager. No camera turned. Customers kept laughing. Employees kept pouring water. Everything went on as if nothing had happened. Only Michael, someone who had sat through thousands of meetings, could recognize when something was being hidden. He set his coffee down. His eyes never left the bar. Not because the coffee had gone cold, but because a familiar feeling had returned, the instinct of a founder who once started with a sidewalk cart, someone who knew all too well when employees stopped believing in fairness, they learned to stay silent. He quietly observed. And then one small detail made him clench his fist. A customer had just taken out their wallet and placed a $5 bill into the tip jar on the counter. But Sasha casually tilted the jar, pulled it inward, and placed it directly into a cabinet under the bar instead of leaving it in the shared space. Rachel saw it. She froze for a moment. Her lips pressed together, but she said nothing. Just continued retrieving pastries from the oven rack as if nothing had happened. Michael looked back at his cup. It was no longer hot. Just like trust in a team, if left to cool too long, it loses its original flavor. Then an older customer, likely a regular, walked up to the bar and struck up a conversation. "Rachel's still working here, huh? That girl, she's really got endurance." Michael raised his head. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice steady, keeping the tone of a stranger. The man gave a faint chuckle, shrugging. "Well, in a place where the tips don't reach the server, someone like her sticking around this long, that's the real surprise." Michael nodded. He didn't say another word. But in his mind, the pieces had started to align. Sasha smiled a lot, but avoided eye contact. Rachel always flinched when customers offered her money. And the tip jar, something that should have symbolized kindness, was being hidden as if it were contraband.
A soft wave of sadness washed over him.
But it wasn't disappointment. It was resolve. He took out his phone. Opened the internal app, one that only the CEO had access to. No call, no message. Just a single tap marking one small point on the company map.
Sunrise branch status under review.
Midday sunlight poured through the large front windows of Sunrise Coffee House, casting a golden hue across the simple wooden tables. The space was cozy, peaceful, as if it were made for people to pause and rest from the world for a few quiet minutes. The soft clink of spoons on ceramic, the hiss of milk frothing in the espresso machine, and the faint scent of cinnamon waffles from the back oven all blended together like the background music of a well-rehearsed stage. A ponytailed girl hurriedly wiped a table. A middle-aged couple shared lunch and exchanged gentle smiles. In the far right corner of the bar, Michael Foster remained still a part of the backdrop, yet his eyes missed nothing. The front door opened. A breeze swept in. And at that moment, the key players began to step onto the stage of truth. Rachel Thompson, 24 years old. Petite, with soft hair draping over tired eyes, she had a friendly air, always smiling even when exhaustion clung to her gaze. Her movements were delicate. She walked on her toes as if afraid to disturb. Her left wrist bore a faded rubber bracelet, a memento from her part-time job during college. Rachel never stopped moving, pouring coffee, delivering pastries, nodding at regulars. Everything she did was precise, not too much, not too little. But through the eyes of a man who had run an F&B chain for over 30 years, Michael saw far more. On her third trip to the water station, Rachel paused briefly, glancing at the tip jar near the register. Her eyes flicked away. She exhaled quietly, a breath tangled with anxiety and helplessness. Todd Baines, 38 years old, morning shift lead, the opposite of Rachel in every way. Square jaw, a constant look of unnecessary sternness. Eyes that never lingered on anyone for more than 3 seconds unless to give an order. Todd never touched a drink tray, never stepped in to help when the caf got busy, but he always stood close to the register where the tip box was kept. Michael noticed. Todd barely moved, but his eyes scanned the room quickly, especially every time a customer left a tip. Then came a quiet but telling moment at exactly 11:42 a.m. An older man, gray hair, wearing a worn wool sweater, placed a takeaway order. While waiting beside Michael, he struck up a friendly conversation. "You haven't been here before, have you?" Michael smiled, "Just dropping by." "Seems like a nice place." The man nodded, then lowered his voice. "Nice, yeah. But see that girl over there, Rachel? She's put up with this place for over a year now. Not everyone lasts that long, not under that guy, Todd." Michael tilted his head. "What do you mean?" The man just shrugged. "They've got their own way of managing tips around here. I can't even be sure the money I leave goes to the right person." As soon as he walked away, Rachel leaned over the tip box. She quickly counted a few small bills, three $1, one $5. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them and quietly slipped them into her inside pocket. Michael caught that moment. He squinted, not in anger, but in understanding. People only do that when they've run out of options. And just then, as if he had eyes in the back of his head, Todd stepped in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just stood next to Rachel, leaned in, and whispered something that made her freeze, leave the tips. "I'll take care of it." Rachel didn't speak. She nodded and pulled her hand out of her pocket. The crumpled bills hadn't even had a chance to be flattened. Michael observed silently. But inside him, something began to stir. Not just suspicion, but a deliberate, simmering anger. Todd didn't need to shout. His every word made the staff shrink. Rachel didn't spend the tips. She hid them like an act of survival. A regular admitted no one knows where the tips really go. Michael stood up, quietly walked to the counter to grab some extra sugar. Still composed, still calm, but his eyes had begun tracking. Every nod Todd gave to staff, every moment Sasha, the shift assistant, moved briskly past the tip jar without ever touching it. Every glance exchanged that might look ordinary to a stranger, but to a CEO, it was the silent language of a system gone wrong. Michael returned to his seat. The coffee was still warm, but the picture behind that cup was slowly taking on a much darker shade. The wall clock ticked its way to 12:06 p.m. The rush had passed. The caf was a little quieter, but the air felt heavier. Michael Foster considered ordering another latte when his eyes landed on a moment unfolding at the bar. Rachel was clearing a tray from table 6. In one hand, a cloth. But her ear was tilted towards Sasha, who stood by the pastry shelf. Rachel's voice was low, but Michael heard it clearly. He was the closest one to her. "I'm not sure I'll have enough for the last bus tonight." It was a whisper barely audible, but it hit him like a stone dropped into the still waters of his chest. Michael gripped his cup a little tighter. The heat was still there, but his heart skipped. Not because of the drink, not because of clumsy service, but because the very system he had spent over 2 decades building was now making a young woman worry if she could afford to get home. A part of him wanted to rise right then and end it all. But he knew it wasn't time yet, because the truth was still hiding in the silences that had yet to speak. A few minutes later, the older customer, the same man who had spoken to Michael earlier, returned to the counter for a napkin. He leaned slightly toward Michael's table and whispered, "You know that girl Rachel asked to pick up the night shift last month?" But Todd said no. Michael looked up. His eyes were calm, like the surface of a still lake. Why the man exhaled and shook his head. To put it bluntly, she's not fast enough, meaning she couldn't flip tables fast, didn't get enough returning customers. He sighed again. But the truth is, Todd didn't want to lose his morning tips. You see, tips from the night shift are split differently. And Rachel, she's good. Customers love her. Their conversation was cut short by a voice ringing from the counter. "Rachel, table 5's not wiped down yet. Move it." Michael didn't say a word. But something inside him snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was quiet. Definitive. A silent fracture between the ideals he had poured into Foster's and the reality he was witnessing now. At about 12:17, a man left the caf and placed a crisp $10 tip on the table, twice the usual amount. Rachel walked over and gave a small, polite bow and thanks. Just as she bent to pick up the bill and place it into the tip jar, Todd stepped in. "Leave it. I'll collect and split them all later." Rachel hesitated, but the customer said it was for me. Todd shrugged. Rules are rules. If you don't like it, take it up with upper management. The words sounded light, but they struck like a slap across the dignity of a young woman just trying to work. Michael rose from his seat, pretending to grab a napkin, but really to move in closer and observe more clearly. He saw Rachel return to the counter, pull a small receipt from her pocket, and quietly wipe her eyes, thinking no one noticed. He noticed every motion, every tear that didn't fall but sank into her throat, her uniform, and into the hearts of those who cared to see. Michael felt betrayed. Not by others, but by the very system he had built. Rachel, she didn't complain. She didn't try to earn sympathy. She just kept working, even when stripped of recognition and opportunity. Todd had recreated a system of control disguised as equal sharing. But really, it was manipulation and the erasure of fairness. Michael returned to his seat, his back hunched slightly, his hand still holding the latte untouched. His thoughts drifted backwards to the earliest days when Foster's was just a tiny caf in the old part of town. Back then, he personally greeted every customer. He knew every staff member, and he made sure no one went home hungry or feeling unseen. He once said a good cup of coffee just needs quality beans, but a fair system needs a heart in the right place. But now, there was a Rachel silently crying behind the counter, a Todd hoarding tips with eyes that knew power, and a CEO sitting in silence but not for much longer. At exactly 12:29, Todd turned to Sasha and said, "Today's sales are weak. We're recalculating the tips. Tell everyone if I catch anyone pocketing tips, it won't end well." Rachel said nothing. She only lowered her head and wiped the counter. But Michael stood up, and in his eyes that quiet fire was no longer silent. Michael walked toward the counter, not rushing, but not hesitating either. Each step felt heavy, as if crushing the old trust he had once placed in the system he created. Todd was bent over counting tips when he looked up to see a man standing across from him. "Hello, sir. Can I help?" Michael didn't answer right away. He pulled a $50 bill from his wallet and placed it on the counter right in front of Todd. No explanation. Just a gaze, still deep and cold like ancient steel. Todd blinked. This money is for Michael spoke. His voice was low and steady, not loud, but every employee began turning to look. I saw a customer leave a $10 tip for Rachel. But you took it. Todd stiffened slightly. No, sir. I was just collecting tips to divide evenly as per policy then. This is my even share. The words weren't angry, but the air in the calf froze like a stretched string pulled too tight. Todd stepped back slightly. He reached for the bill, but Michael stopped him. Don't touch it. It's not for you. He turned toward Rachel. She stood only a few steps away, still holding her spray bottle, eyes wide open, as if she had never seen a customer speak on her behalf. Rachel, do you recognize me? She gently shook her head. Her lips parted, but no words came. Michael nodded slowly, then reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out an old, worn employee badge. Founder's badge. Dated 2003. Still has my first signature on the back when Foster's only had 3 branches. He handed the badge to Rachel. The whole calf fell silent, as if the sound had been sliced out of the air. Rachel looked bewildered. She reached out and touched the badge like it was something too sacred to belong to her, then instinctively stepped back her chest, rising and falling in shock and confusion. You're Mr. Foster, yes? And I didn't come here today to drink a latte. I came to hear the truth. Todd looked like the color had drained from his face, but he still tried to maintain a normal tone. Sir, this is a misunderstanding. I always follow protocol. Tips are shared fairly. Michael locked eyes with him. Fairness doesn't need to be hidden up someone's sleeve. If what you were doing was right, why did Rachel have to wipe away her tears when she thought no one was looking? The words sliced through the room. Every employee held their breath. Sasha, the colleague who had been working alongside Rachel, stepped forward. Her voice soft. Mr. Foster, I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner. Tips customers left specifically for Rachel have been taken multiple times. We were afraid of being reassigned. Michael turned away from Todd. He pulled out a small notebook, the kind he always carried on undercover visits, and wrote a few lines. Todd, suspended from duty. Effective immediately. Todd froze. You can't, I can. Because I'm the one who wrote the policy. Rachel stood still. She didn't cry, but her whole body trembled, not from fear, but from being unaccustomed to someone finally standing up for her. Michael returned to his seat. But before he sat down, he turned back to ask Rachel, are you free this afternoon? Yes, I am. Then, at 2 p.m., meet me at the main branch office. I need a new morning shift manager for this location. Rachel couldn't believe her ears. She hesitated. I'm not sure I'm ready. Michael smiled for the first time that afternoon. No one's ever ready to be brave, but you were the only one who didn't bow your head to what's wrong. That's enough. After suspending Todd, Michael didn't leave the calf right away. He stayed seated, blending into the space, melting into the rhythm of what appeared to be a normal day. But in truth, he was listening. Not with his ears, but with full attention. At around 1:15 p.m., the lunch shift went on as usual, but everyone knew the atmosphere had changed. Michael stood and quietly made his way to the back kitchen where a man named Lewis in charge of pastries was scraping burnt batter off a baking tray. Lewis, can I ask you something? Lewis nodded, his collar damp with sweat. He paused for a moment, then lowered his voice. You're asking about the tips, right? Michael neither nodded nor shook his head. He just looked directly at him. Lewis hesitated briefly, then exhaled, like finally letting go of a burden. I've seen Todd collect all the tips at the end of the day. He says he's going to evenly split them in the back office, but we never see any clear list. Sometimes we don't even know how much we're supposed to get. Michael stayed silent. He wrote every word into his small notebook. Lewis, a quiet pastry cook, rarely spoke to customers. Yet he felt like an outsider in his own workplace because the fruits of his labor were never acknowledged and never showed up on any bonus board. The next conversation was with Danny, a new server, only 2 weeks on the job. When Michael asked, she looked nervous, glanced around, then quietly pulled out her phone and showed him a photo of last week's shift schedule. Danny whispered, "I noticed anyone who says something to Todd ends up getting pushed to side shifts the next week." "You mean slow hours?" 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. or 3 p.m. to close. No customers, no tips. Michael examined the photo closely. On the handwritten schedule in red ink, some names had been crossed out and rewritten in blue, as if someone had made changes based on mood, not merit. Danny had just graduated. This was her first job helping her pay nursing school tuition. She didn't dare complain. She was afraid to lose the only seat she had left in an increasingly expensive world. Near the end of the shift, Michael returned to the register. Rachel was still working, her face neutral, but her eyes still slightly red. No one noticed, except him. As the lunch shift wrapped up, each person began cleaning. The calf quieted, bathed in soft reflections dancing across the tabletops. Rachel sat at the last chair in the row, opened her paycheck slip. Her eyes scanned the line, bonus tips payout $6.40. She let out a laugh. Not because she was happy, but because it was bitter. $6.40 for nearly 3 nonstop hours of service. The young woman sat there holding the slip like a document that just stripped away her last bit of faith in what people call internal fairness. Michael stood at a distance. He didn't call out, didn't intervene, just watched in silence. Inside him, the disappointment wasn't aimed at others. It was turning inward. Back in the small office behind the calf, Michael picked up his phone. He called Emily Park, National Operations Director. "Emily, I need a detailed report of all locations in the region within 24 hours. It's already on the system. I'll send it right away." "No, I don't want a cleaned up data set. I want the full record clock-ins, internal bonuses, and all anonymous staff feedback. If anyone submitted something that was ignored, I want to see it." Emily paused for a few seconds, then answered firmly, "Understood, Mr. Foster." Michael closed the phone, sat down on the worn-out chair in the office, the place that was supposed to be the last outpost against injustice. He looked up at the whiteboard where the company slogan was written, "We serve with integrity." A slogan. A truth still incomplete. He picked up a marker and wrote underneath, "Integrity starts when no one is watching." No need to raise his voice. No need to justify. Just piece by piece, letting the truth thread itself together through listening, through asking the right questions, through a pair of eyes no longer willing to look away from wrongdoing. Michael Foster, founder of Foster's, didn't come here to judge. He came to truly see each person who had been made invisible within the very system he created. And he knew real action begins with acknowledgement. Around 2:05 p.m., the calf had emptied out. The last lunch shift staff had already left. Michael was still seated in the corner of the staff room, the warm yellow light casting over his face, tired but sharply awake. The door creaked open. A figure no one expected walked in. Jasmine, longtime staff, currently acting treasurer, holding a folder of old documents. No one had called her, but she came. "Mr. Foster, I think you should know about this." Her voice didn't shake, but it carried the weight of someone who had stayed silent for far too long. Michael nodded. "No words." Jasmine set the folder down on the desk. "I've kept the tip distribution sheets from the past 6 months. Some of them don't match what was submitted to the system." Michael opened the first one. The top page was a scanned copy of last week's tip record. Rachel's name was faint at the bottom, only receiving $9.60, while others got between $45 and $60. The next page was a handwritten version with a note: "Rachel, customer, tipped privately, not included in total distribution." Who wrote this? Jasmine hesitated. "I'm not sure, but the handwriting looks a lot like Todd's." Michael flipped to the back of the folder. One page had been torn and taped back together with clear tape. It was the original shift schedule with none of the blue ink edits Danny had shown him earlier. Jasmine pulled out her phone. She played a 32-second recording. It was Todd. His voice cold, clear. Anyone who wants to keep their morning shift better, stay in line. If you want to speak up, you can enjoy the evening shift where all the customers order is water and toast. Silence. Then he scoffed, "Here equals split means I split. And the rest of you, stay quiet?" Michael didn't speak for 10 full seconds. His eyes blinked slowly as if he'd just seen the full extent of the spiderweb that had stretched through his organization from the tiniest cracks. "Jasmine, how long have you kept all this since the first time I saw Rachel cry after getting her tip breakdown? I suspected something, but I wasn't sure. Now I can't stay silent." Jasmine had always been the quiet type, kept to her job, never stepped on toes. But today she chose the opposite, even if it meant upsetting an entire layer of management. Michael placed a hand on the folder. He didn't open it right away. He just looked at Jasmine. "If I hadn't come here today," Jasmine gave a sad smile, "nothing would have changed. Todd would still be in charge. Rachel would still be smiling through it. And Foster's would keep being a beautiful dream warped." A soft breeze slipped through the cracked office window. Michael felt a chill at the back of his neck. Not because of the weather, but because he knew truth doesn't always live in reports. It lives in the eyes of someone like Jasmine, in the unseen tears of a girl like Rachel, in words buried deep like that audio recording. Michael thought of the early days when the company was small, when every employee got a birthday greeting from him, and every holiday bonus was split down to the dollar. Now he held a folder full of the names they'd made invisible. Red pen marks choking fairness. And he knew doing nothing is a form of consent. He stood up. "Jasmine, take the rest of the day off. Tomorrow everything changes." She looked at him, eyes slightly glassy. "Thank you, Mr. Foster." Michael didn't reply. He simply stepped out of the office. The afternoon sky outside had turned a warm amber, as if even the sky knew something was about to be undone. Michael wasn't looking for applause. He wasn't looking for praise. He just wanted to know who hid the truth. And now he did. Not because someone tattled, but because people like Jasmine, like Lewis, like Danny, small but brave, chose to speak up when it mattered most. Michael Foster stood up. No applause. No one called him CEO. But the entire CAF seemed to freeze in that moment, as if someone had just unplugged the artificial atmosphere that had stretched on all through the afternoon. Michael folded his napkin in half, placed it on the table, a simple, firm gesture. A period at the end of silent observation. He walked past 2 rows of tables. No one spoke, but a few eyes followed.
Rachel held her breath.
Todd, seated at the far end of the counter reviewing his logbook, paused the moment he caught Michael's silhouette in the corner of his eye. Michael didn't beat around the bush. "I have a few questions about how tips are distributed here." His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, and even clearer was the shift in the room's air, suddenly condensed into a pressure so thick it felt suffocating. Todd looked up, forcing a crooked smile. "Everything's according to protocol, sir." Michael said nothing. He calmly pulled out a small notebook from his coat. A handwritten list, underlined in blue ink. Lewis never informed of actual tip amount. Danny's shift schedule shows signs of manual correction. Rachel $6.40 for a 3-hour lunch shift. 3 resignations in the last 6 weeks, reason reassigned to off-peak shifts after complaints. Todd's eyes shifted, but he tried to stay composed. "Sir, I've just been following instructions from upper management." Michael looked up. A short sentence, but it dropped like ink into a still pond. "Upper management," Todd nodded. "There's an email. If you'd like, I can." Michael cut him off. "Then print it. Right here. Right now." Todd hesitated. "The network might be down." Michael pointed directly at the POS machine behind the counter. "The network is working. Your system just processed an Apple Pay transaction 3 minutes ago." A beat of silence. One of the baristas, Jake, who operated the espresso machine, subtly moved toward the corner of the counter as if to step out of view. But Michael noticed. He turned. Jake, have you ever received your tips directly from Todd? Jake glanced at Todd, then back at Michael. He hesitated, swallowing hard, not exactly sure. Usually Todd says he'll collect it all and transfer it at the end of the week. Michael continued. Any receipts or proof of transfer? Jake shook his head. EMOTIONALDROP. One, a simple shake of the head, but it landed like a silent confession about a system built to keep people quiet and compliant. Michael turned back to Todd. I won't ask again. Todd shot up from his chair. Sir, I think you're blowing this out of proportion. Only a voice rang out from the entrance. No, he's not blowing it out of proportion. Everyone turned. Emily Park, National Director of Operations, stepped inside. Her gaze sharp as a blade, followed by 2 HR officers from the regional team. Todd froze. Michael didn't look at her. He simply stepped back, giving space. Emily didn't need to introduce herself. Didn't need to flash a badge. Just one short sentence: immediate suspension from duty. She placed an envelope on the counter inside printed reports of anonymous employee complaints over the past 3 months. Over 80% of them pointed to one name. Todd opened his mouth. Nobody warned me about this. There's no formal disciplinary process. Michael turned for the first time, looking Todd directly in the eye. No longer calm, there is no process that allows decency to be taken from people. EMOTIONALDROP2. No need to shout. No need to pound the table. Just one sentence, sharp as a blade, cutting between false fairness and buried truth. Emily nodded to HR. They escorted Todd out. A few customers whispered. Rachel stood behind the counter, fingers gripping the edge of her apron. Michael turned to her. I heard you were the only one who didn't miss a single shift, even when you were paid just $6.40. Rachel's eyes widened. She didn't know what to say. Michael nodded. From today, you're the new shift lead. She gasped. Not sure I'm ready. Michael smiled for the first time that afternoon. No one's ever ready to be brave. But you were the only one who didn't look away from what was wrong. That's enough. EMOTIONALDROP3SATISFACTIONFACTORMAXAD in a space once ruled by silent power. Someone stands up not by title but by dignity never lost. The audience doesn't just CEO taking action. They see a system beginning to heal itself not with sledgehammers, but with timely questions and unwavering resolve. And so Michael walked out of the cafe, no farewell speech, but leaving behind a new team ready to rebuild fairness one cup of coffee at a time. But Michael hadn't left yet. Just as the door closed behind Todd, he stopped at the bar, Rachel still standing there, stunned. A hush settled.
Then Michael tilted his head.
His eyes caught something small under the espresso machine, a dented tin box labeled MISC Receipts. What's that? He asked, eyes still fixed on the box. Jake hesitated. Just scraps, old receipts, random papers. No one's touched it in months. Michael bent down, opened the lid. Inside, a clutter of folded slips, post-it notes, and a stack of old pay stubs from the outdated system, each showing the employee shift hours and tip totals. He pulled out one: Rachel Nguyen Wednesday PM shift, 5 hours tips, $0. Then another: Luis Romero Sunday AM shift, 6 hours tips, $1. 20th, 3rd, 4th, 5th, all with one thing in common: long hours, near 0 tips. Rachel slowly approached, eyes trembling as she looked at the papers in his hands. I thought those slips were destroyed. Todd said the system had glitches and told us not to let anyone see them. Michael said nothing. He flipped over one page. On the back, scribbled in messy handwriting, "Keep this quiet, we adjust manually now. Don't raise." No signature, no stamp, but enough to shatter everything. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was evidence. Not just data, but the forced silence now finally given a voice. Michael turned to Emily, now standing nearby. Suspension isn't enough, he said softly. I want a full investigation across every location. Emily nodded. We won't overlook a single dollar. He looked up toward the glass door where the afternoon sun spilled across the tiled floor. But he didn't leave. Instead, he placed the entire stack of pay stubs on the table and pulled up a chair. Rachel, do you know the people who recently left? I want to call them back. Rachel gave a small nod. I still have Danny and Lewis's numbers. They both wanted to stay here long-term. Michael placed his hand on the stack of papers. Then this is our chance to give them a reason to return. This wasn't just about disciplining wrongdoers. Not just about appointing someone new. It was about repairing the damage from the root by finding those who lost their chance and giving them the fairness they never had. No one spoke loudly. There was no applause. But the audience could feel as clearly as sunlight streaming through the window that justice was beginning to take shape, one action at a time, by the very founder of it all. Michael removed his glasses. A slow motion like peeling away the last layer of distance. No more passive watching. No more reserved glances. He looked directly at Todd, who had just been brought back in to sign the suspension papers, and spoke each word slicing through the room like a verdict. I am Michael Foster, founder of Foster's Coffee House. A clink echoed from somewhere. Someone had dropped a spoon. Rachel stood frozen behind the bar. Jake whispered, almost breathless, "Oh my God," and Todd went pale. Michael didn't continue. Not with words. He placed his phone on the counter and pressed play. On-screen footage from the internal security camera system. Timestamp 12:52 p.m. Camera angle from behind the counter, Todd holding a thick envelope of cash, walking toward the back office door. He looked around, hesitated, then pushed the door open.
The screen jumped.
Timestamp 12:53 p.m. New clip, Todd walking back out. No envelope in hand. Michael didn't explain. He didn't have to. He simply raised his hand, pointing to the store's policy board, hung just above the espresso machine where every employee read it at the start of every shift. All tips must be pooled and transparently redistributed. All redistributions must be logged, receipted, and viewable upon request. Michael looked straight at Todd. He didn't raise his voice, but his eyes were the sentence. The tipping policy was clear, but here it was exploited. Todd stammered, stepping forward. I didn't think you'd actually show up. I mean, maybe this is just a misunderstanding. Emily Park didn't wait for him to finish. She stepped forward, laying a new file on the counter, this time the internal financial logs from the last 3 months. She flipped quickly to a page, internal bonuses, unexplained adjustments authorized by Todd Sanders. EMOTIONALDROP1THEMAs no more excuses. The audience now sees the brutal truth. The system didn't rot on its own. It was corrupted by the very people trusted to protect it. Michael looked up, his face cast with the angular light from the window, but his voice gentle. This isn't just about a few missing dollars in tips. It's about the trust of people who gave up their entire afternoon to serve here, only to go home with not even enough for a proper meal. He turned to Rachel. You weren't the only victim, but you were the first to stay, even when you thought you had no right to speak up. Rachel bit her lip. Her eyes were red, but she nodded. EMOTIONALDROP2TRUTHDOASN and EEADTOSHO. You watching this aren't just seeing a CEO exposing misconduct. You're seeing a man admitting that he hadn't looked deeply enough, hadn't listened carefully enough, and now is making things right the most powerful way possible with his presence. Michael concluded, I will no longer let anyone be forced to choose between silence and unemployment. From today, every internal report will go directly to my office. No filters. No gatekeepers. Emily nodded in confirmation. She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, a direct report form to the founder, and pinned it to the notice board. This form will be displayed in every location starting tomorrow. No one had to raise their voice to demand justice. No one had to leave to be heard. A CEO stepped into the light, not to command, but to hear the truths he once overlooked. Michael stood still for a moment. Then he turned back, no need for a notebook, no need for more proof. He simply looked at every face in front of him. Eyes that once looked down now looked up at him, not because of his title, but because something in the way he stood there, quiet but unwavering, made them believe. And then he spoke. His voice low but clear in the silence that had just been born starting this week. All tip money will be deposited directly into each person's bank account. No more passing through any shift leader. A heartbeat skipped. Jake looked up, his lips parting in disbelief. The waitress in the back corner covered her mouth. Rachel stood behind the counter, still holding the cup she hadn't yet filled. Michael turned to her. "Rachel, you don't have to walk home anymore." She froze. Just blinked. A single tear slid down her cheek, not out of pain, but because finally someone had truly seen her. Michael continued, "I've arranged a private transfer enough to cover your transportation for the month. And starting today, our new policy guarantees this: no one at Foster's will have to live in fear just for choosing to work with integrity. EMOTIONALDROP1TRUEHEALING. Not everyone cried from relief, but most exhaled like they were finally breathing for the first time. A small sign behind the bar fell silently to the floor, the old house rules long covered up by internal-only regulations. Jake bent down, picked it up, and folded it. No one told him to, but something inside had shifted. Michael walked slowly to the center of the cafe, and then, unscripted, unprompted, a customer stood. Then another. Applause echoed, not because someone got fired, but because they had just witnessed justice that didn't need a spotlight. The audience didn't need a glittering ending. Just one right action at the right time on what seemed like an ordinary afternoon. An elderly man who had shared a table with Michael muttered, "This place finally feels like the coffee shop I used to love." Michael didn't reply. He simply smiled, then turned to the regional HR manager. "I want updated pay scales, revised contracts, and a new complaint procedure ready this week."
Send me the first draft by Thursday night.
Emily nodded. The HR team started taking notes. Rachel stepped forward slowly, but with resolve. She stood in front of Michael and spoke softly. I don't know what to say. Just thank you for not only seeing, but listening." Michael smiled. "Not everyone has the courage to keep going, and that deserves to be protected. No loud celebration, no cake or fanfare. Just people who once stayed silent, now beginning to speak. Eyes that once darted away, now meeting straight ahead. And one man who had once sat quietly in a corner booth, now left behind a change that could no longer be ignored. A CEO doesn't have to shout to prove power. He only needs to stand still in truth, listen to what once felt too small, and step in with uncompromising kindness at the exact right moment. Justice doesn't begin with a slogan. It begins the moment we choose to set our coffee cup down and stand up. One cup of coffee may not change the world, but the way we serve it can change someone's life.